welcome back to Lessons Learned. I'm Sherry, and this is your Wednesday video in the Quilt As You Go series. And this is episode number 4. So there are 3 other videos you'll want to view before going forward with this next step, and I will link those in the description box. So by now we should have 8 blocks finished, 8 12-inch blocks, and we have done our Quilt As You Go method of sashing as well on these. So you should have 8 blocks that are sashed together with 3 strips of sashing, and now we need to trim these blocks up. So I'm going to show you how to do that, actually trimming a row. We've already trimmed our blocks to the 12 inches that we need, and we did that in an accurate way so that, you know, that was a one and only time that you would square those up. But now that we've added the sashing in, you're probably noticing a little bit of sliding going on with the sashing. For example, I have one here that's kind of bad where my sashing is pretty far above where my blocks are. So I need to trim that off because we're going to do the same method to join our 2 rows together, and we don't want that extra bulk in there. So let me go ahead and show you how I'm going to trim these up. So our rows ended up being about 52 inches long. So we don't have a ruler that we can run across here that's 52 inches long. If you do, more power to you, but the longest ruler I have is a 36 inch, but I think that's going to be sufficient, and I'm just going to set the corner of my ruler right on the corner exactly of my row here. So as I move the ruler towards that edge, I'm going to kind of split the difference between right on the edge and anything over the edge. So as a matter of fact, I have that one piece here that's going to get trimmed off, and I have a little tiny sliver right here that's sticking out. So in that 36 inch span, I'm not going to be losing anything that I need. And now I can do that same thing on this end and just match up my end with my ruler exactly. Just lay your ruler exactly on that corner and then check it down here and see what's sticking out. And I've just got a teeny tiny sliver sticking out right about there, and then some ravelings. So that is going to straighten up my row enough that I can go ahead and start applying my sashing. Now if you don't have a long enough ruler, if you don't have a very long ruler at all, maybe you have 2 rulers that, you know, make a good span. I have 2 rulers here that are, looks like they're 18, and you can put those side by side like this, or end to end I should say, and do the same thing. You would have to precariously hold those where they hook together so that they stay straight. I happen to have one of these little doodads, and this is from SEWN, but you can actually hook your 2 rulers together with that. I'll show you how that works. You have to make sure there's no gaps, and then just stick that on between the 2. That one has a hole in the end, so you want to use the ends that don't have a hole, and then you can stick that on there. Make sure it's secure, and there you have 2 rulers in one that are going to stay together. You could also tape them together temporarily. Tape peels off of these rulers pretty easy, but this would be a way to actually anchor it down and hold it all at the same time and still be able to make your trim there. So that's a couple of pointers on that. I'm going to go ahead and trim off the bottom of this one so that it's nice and even, and then when we put our sashing between the two rows, everything will be straight. Now, one thing you also want to make sure before you start sewing these on, and I'll probably mention it again, is make sure you have them all right side up. So like this, the tiniest piece of your block is the top of your block, or the topmost part of your block. So your next row above that, make sure they're the same way. So that's something you can easily get turned around. Wouldn't be the end of the world on this sort of pattern, but I think that it would look nicer if everything was the same on each row. So I'm going to trim this one off the same way as I did this, and then I'll go over to the sewing machine and tell you how to cut your strip here and how to apply it. Alright, so from your yardage for your sashing, you're going to cut just like you did for your regular sashing, but you're going to cut 2 width of fabric 4.5 inch pieces, and we're going to join these because our width of our quilt is 52.5, so 40 or 42 or whatever your fabric is not going to be enough. We're going to have to piece it across. I'm just going to take my 2 pieces and make one straight 1/4 inch seam. If you want to do like you do on binding and do it on an angle, go for it. It's fine. I don't know, I think I just want that seam to not be so conspicuous, so I'm just gonna go with the little 1/4 inch seam. So once I get done, I'll have a 90 inch long piece that will cut down to 52.5 or 53, whatever you feel comfortable with. 52.5 is the exact measurement, so if you're a little insecure about that reaching good on your quilt, then make it just a little bit longer and trim it, but not too much. And then also we will have the same width of fabric, 2.5 inch for the back side of our sashing. So we're going to have to link those so that we have a long enough piece to stretch across the back. So that is the first part, is putting these together. So once that's together, then we'll go and measure out our 52.5 or 53, whatever you feel comfortable with. And then after this, I'll show you the next step. Alright, so I have everything laid out here ready to sew. I took my strips to the iron and ironed open my seam that I made where I joined my 2 pieces to make it long enough, and I ironed those open to reduce the bulk. And then I also folded it in half and ironed that just like we did for our vertical sashing. Same thing for our horizontal sashing, exact same thing. And then also I joined these 2 pieces for the back, the 2.5 inch, and I also opened that seam. And also, to make sure we don't get a lot of bulk in the same place, when you place this to the back, make sure this one's seam is on one end of your row and this one's seam is on the other end of the row, and that way these won't wind up right on top of each other through all those layers. So that's a good way to reduce some bulk and have inconspicuous joins. Now, as far as our batting goes, I'll talk about that more in a second. You're going to need a long 1.5 inch piece. After all, I did cut these at 53, so I just cut everything at 53 just to be sure I'd have something small to trim off and not be shorted. You can join this if you don't have any pieces that are long. I happen to have a lot of long pieces, so if you don't have long pieces, you just got some odd squares, you can use one of those 2 methods that I pointed out in the last video of how to join those up, and not a problem. So let's get going here. We're going to do it just like we did with our other vertical sashing. We're going to lay our raw edges to our trimmed side of top of our row, and then we're also going to put our back side, right sides together against our back. And you can go down through there and clip, pin, whatever you like to do. I think I'm going to clip this time. So let me get some clips and I'll clip the length of this row and then I'll be ready to sew it. Okay, so I have my clips in and you can see the front where I have the raw edges of my binding to the top of my row, and then the back has the 2.5 inch single layer clipped together. So I clipped about every 5 or 6 inches. So now I can start sewing, and the first seam we sew is identical to the vertical sashing, and that being a 1/4 inch seam, catching all those layers in together. And you want to use a 2 to 2.5 inch stitch on this part. And as usual, I'm going to keep my fingers really close and keep this spread out to the side so that it does not pull in towards the seam and then you get a whole lot of bunching up. It's more critical on these horizontal rows than ever because you have so much space to cover. So just make sure everything is getting in equally. I see my back piece sticking out a little too much. Make adjustments as you go. It's worth it. It's way better than ripping something out after you've already stitched it incorrectly. So I'm just going to go down through here and I'll meet you back when I get to the end. Okay, so I got that sewing done. And those two pieces are attached now and they're ready to encase our batting strip. But first, we have to put our next row on. So right sides together the back of your next row to the right side of your 2.5 inch strip. But there's some considerations here that you want to take very seriously. And that is, don't worry about lining up the outer edges too much because we can always trim those. However, if you don't line up your vertical batting strips, let me see if I can get this to work and show you good. See, this needs to be lined up with that one. So when you go down through here and get ready to pin this together, make sure that all of these vertical batting strips line up with each other. It's a little precarious, but you want to make sure that those line up. And then when you get to the end, if you have more than you need on one row than another, then we'll be trimming that again. Just like you did when you trimmed your rows, we'll have a tiny bit to trim off. So just make sure that you pin first where the vertical sashing is. So you're pinning your 2.5 inch strip right sides together to the backing of your next row. Also, you want to make sure that when this is together, that your tops or your bottoms of your blocks are the same. So, you know, you could easily turn one of these strips around and then have your two tops close to each other, or your two bottoms close to each other. So a couple of things there that's very important to keep in mind. But most of all at this point is making sure that these vertical sashings line up with each other when you get ready to sew these together. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and pin those down and sew them up. And I actually pinned mine with these forked pins that I have. If you don't have these, you can just use more pins. But I put 3 pins in each block, and then that way when I get ready to sew, it's going to stay where my vertical sashing needs to be. And if there's any ease or extra fabric on your 2.5 inch piece right here, you're going to want to ease that in before you get to the next pin so that you don't have a pucker, because a pucker will show on this single layer here. So just go slow and make adjustments as needed. And when I say ease in, just use your fingers to kind of make sure that that all gets taken up without pleats before you get to your next pin. Okay, here we go. Okay, that was a little bit hard, wasn't it? Keeping these straight and pinned and trying to not have puckers and whatnot. It was a little bit precarious, but we got through it, and it looks good. It looks like our vertical pieces are lining up good because we pinned them down well. And then the next phase of this is probably to give it a good press back here where we've sewn. And also, once you get that one pressed, then press this one over, and then you'll be able to insert your batting just like you did on your verticals, exactly the same. So there that is, and then that'll go over. You'll stitch it down just like you did on the verticals, and then do your other stitching inside of this sashing if you desire to have any more stitching in there. I'm going to do the same thing as I did here with my lines. So I think I will go ahead and trim off where some of these aren't exactly meeting up correctly on both ends. And then I did run mine 53 inches. So I have an extra inch nearly. I don't know why it's an inch. I just kind of winged it. I didn't, it was 52 and a half is what I needed. So I just took my scissors and just went up to 53-ish. So I did that on purpose, and that's fine. But you can see here when I get rid of that my two blocks are gonna be even here. So there we go. We got it going. It's looking good. So let me go ahead and do those steps that I just mentioned, and I'll come back and show you how it looks. Alright, a couple of things I want to point out. You can actually see quite a bit of my easing that I did from that front side. If you'll notice here, there's some little tiny puckers right here. They're not quite pleats, but they are just a tiny bit of a pucker. That is the only way you're ever going to be able to get these verticals in line. Don't worry about that. It's not an imperfection. It's a sewing method. And once you get your top stitching on the top that we do on the edges, that's going to all sink down into the batting and not even be noticed. So that is not anything to worry too much about. The main thing is to do it, because if you don't, there's no way these verticals are going to be in line, and you'll have a really big mess. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to trim this off. Actually, I'm going to do it from this side. And what I'm going to do is get my point here lined up and my point down here lined up. My ruler is not quite long enough. This one isn't, but it'll work. And then I'm going to just kind of give this a little bit of a tug right here, just to make sure that everything is out that's supposed to be out and trimmed off. It looks like I'm going to be a tiny bit short right here, and I could move the ruler in this way just a little bit all the way up, just to kind of mitigate that gap. I call it splitting the difference. So if I can get my ruler kind of halfway on that largest gap, I don't even know if you can see that. It's very slight. See how it goes in here under the ruler? So I need to just get that as straight as I can. This will be the binding side. So, you can kind of adjust for that. But I am going to trim this off so that I get these off. Alright, so that wraps it up for this episode, putting on our horizontal sashing. And I will have to admit, I need to work on my technique on that. So I have 2 more rows that I need to put together. So I'm going to go ahead and get those done. So for your next week or 2, get your other 8 blocks finished, your vertical sashing on, and then join your rows all together. I will be at least referring to this series in another episode, whether it be a Monday quilt chat or a Finish It Friday. I don't know, but the only thing left to do after the steps that we've done in these last 4 videos is to put the sashing on. So that's the beauty of Quilt As You Go. It's all of a sudden, and the quilt is finished. So also I mentioned last time that I was going to put some extra quilting in those squares. I did not do that. I just ran out of time to do that. Hopefully you'll be sending me some of your pictures to show of how your quilt is turning out, and maybe some of you have done that to be able to show. But that is it for now. I hope you learned a lot. I hope this is a method that you will continue to employ in your sewing room to get rid of some of those pesky 2.5-inch strips. And I will be back soon for another series of some sort. And any suggestions you want to give me on anything you want me to try to do, or some sort of quilting method that you want me to try, let me know, and I will be happy to figure it out and give you some good instructions. Alright, I will see you on the next episode of Lessons Learnt, whatever that may be for you. For me, it will be Finish It Friday. And for now, have fun. Bye.